Welcome back to the lab. No practice on this one, just straight into it. We'll just wing it. I get it wrong all the time, but never mind. We'll talk about some things that are on my bench here. Hang on, we're not talking about that. I'm not actually doing anything on that today. It's going away soon. I'm getting wet. I'm videoing and I'm getting wet. Can't drop a little skid. Bye. Jeez, that thing's mental. It's a good feeling, actually. Finally, after basically 2 years, get my workshop back. Yay! Differentials. So where do I drop? Nah, I won't drop the bomb. What's going on? We need to change diff ratios for reasons, which I'll get into later on. And what we've got in the car right now is that manual 350Z transmission, standard. Is absolutely nothing done to it. The front one, solid bushes, which I've made up, and we've changed to a different oh no, that is correct, that's what they have on them. The back one we've changed to a CV joint style flange, which is what you see on this one over here, which is not the back diff. And I've taken a wee notch out of the casing just to give us some clearance over the top of the steering rack. So that has a ratio of 3.538 to 1. I wrote it there so I wouldn't get it wrong. I do remember that one off the top of my head usually, but I've got to remember a couple of other ones at the same time, so I might have got confused, but not now. We can run, these will just bolt straight in, aside from that modification to the case I talked about on that one. We can run the auto diffs, which are 3.357. Because of what we're doing, we're losing some revs in our prop shaft. So with that diff, everything the way it is right now, we can do a theoretical max speed of 260 kilometers an hour, which we nearly got to at Pukekohe with 250. If other things had been a little bit better, we might have got knocking on the door of 260. But as you might appreciate, it takes quite a lot of ground to gain a little bit of speed once you're going as quick as that. With the changes we're going to make to the driveline, that diff will only give us 200 kilometers an hour maximum speed, which is nowhere near enough. We're doing 235 plus at Hampton Downs and at Taupo. That will strangle the car and we won't be able to go quick enough. It'll accelerate like a cat and then it'll just run out of revs at the top end. So this diff setup is not going to be any use for us on the circuit anymore. However, it could find its way back into the car for Leadfoot potentially, or something, those things like that. The auto diff, that's got a ratio of 3.357, and that would get us to 24 I think it is, kilometers an hour, which is better and not terrible, but still not quite fast enough. It's still going to strangle the car. We're going to accelerate quite quickly. We're going to get to that 224 kilometers an hour pretty quickly and run out of revs, and we're sitting on the rev limiter for long periods of time, especially at Pukekohe, right? This here is a VQ30DE powered Nissan V35 Skyline differential, and that has a ratio of 3.133. And with that puppy in there, with our current revs, with the driveline changed, we will get 240 kilometers per hour. It's right on the money. That's pretty much perfect. 250 I think would have been an ideal number, but 240 is good enough. That's as close as we're going to get, being realistic about things. There's a whole heap of maths I can show. Well, it's not really complicated. I can show you how I work that out. I won't go through the actual numbers, but we'll do that in a second, right? And so the mighty internet says that crown wheel and pinion from that differential will fit into a 350Z diff. Now here's the problem. That's a 350Z diff. That's a 350Z diff. If you look at where this flanges in relation to the castings on the diff. Let's say it lines up here, right? And if we look at this one, it lines up here in a different spot. So they actually use a different carrier in the manual diff than what they do in the auto diff, which is no biggie because I've got the auto diff. And fortunately, when I was looking at this going, oh, these gears, they're not going to work in here because this face here, this is 10 millimeters different between here and here. So there's absolutely no way our crown wheel and pinion's ever going to line up. It won't work. Boo-hoo, how am I going to make my drivetrain work? And then I was like, hang on a minute, you've got an auto diff kicking around in the house. They're a different ratio. I bet you they've got a different setup in there. So when you got it, pulled it out, there's your answer right there. So that's that problem solved. We actually, the guys at Nissan King, Isuzu Parts World, sorted us out. They've given us that diff to play with. They actually gave us that diff to fix that diff when I broke that. And they gave us a Fuga diff to play with earlier on, which I took apart and saw this, compared it to that, and went, oh, that won't work, and took it back to them. But now that I've figured out you can use, I'm getting lost myself here, I bet you guys are confused. Now I've figured out I can use this carrier with those gears in that case to fix my front diff drive ratio conundrum. We'll go and get that the 450 Fuga diff back off them and another auto 350Z diff, and we'll be sorted. I'm actually quite stoked with that. That is full-on Lego, Nissan Lego fiddling tomfoolery, sorting out a bolt-in solution for a crazy contraption. So I'm happy with that. Very happy. Back to, I'll show you what happens with my, I'm just checking my whiteboard before I let you guys see it and make sure there's not I hate Tom Cruise or anything like that on there. Mind you, Tom Cruise is what he does anyway. Right. Manual transmission diff, that's what's in there at the moment. That's an auto transmission diff. That is our final drive ratio total, including the transfer box for the manual transmission diffs, and that is for the auto transmission diffs, and this is for the Fuga V8 diffs, which is, we've just gone through that over there, talked about that. That's our transfer box ratio. This is the revs that we would have been doing with auto transmission diffs with a 1-to-1 fifth gear ratio instead of 0.75 to 1. Explain that later on down the track. Could have got our speeds up there by increasing revs. Not really all that keen on doing that. It can result in engine failures running higher revs. That engine from the factory I think does 6,900. We are putting stronger valve springs in it. We have got conrods, pistons, bearings, all the things to make it handle more revs, but if you keep the revs down, that's better. Let's make torque, not revs, right? So there's a simple formula that I've been using that's a piece of cake to figure out how fast you'll be able to go. You go and figure out what your whiteboard, excuse the boring whiteboard with nothing on it. Go online, figure out what your revolutions per kilometre are for your tyres. And in our case, for the 285, 35, 18 Nexon SUR4Gs, it's really hard to talk about numbers and write different numbers. It's 490 revs per kilometre. All right, this isn't necessarily the only way to do it. This is how I've been doing. So what you do is you go through an equation. You go your maximum revs, max revs, and then you divide it by final drive ratio. Final drive ratio. I can't do the calculator and the camera and the whiteboard at the same time, so I'm not going to give you the exact numbers. Times 60 divided by revolutions per minute, per kilometre. So why you had to times that by 60 is your revolutions of your engine will be revolutions per minute right? And then you divide it by your final drive ratio. Let's start with some easy numbers that I can. Nah, I'll get it all wrong off the top of my head, so let's not. So in our case, we're at 7,300 RPM. Divide it by a final drive ratio, which is going to be 3.7. You guys can do the maths at home if you like. Times 60 gives you revolutions per hour, right? Because we're talking kilometers per hour. Then you divide it by 490, because that's how many you will need to do each kilometer. And that number that pops out the end here is your peak speed, kilometers per hour. Pretty easy. Pretty easy. This bloody thing, it's gate crashing the screen here. We can't have that Gloria in this video. It's just right. It'll curse the video. Shh, don't talk about it. So there you go. That's what I'm up to right now. There's some other things going to happen. This video's being filmed. I'm talking right now this Tuesday. I'm going to carry on and build a diff. And we're going to stick it in. You'll notice the car's not even in the shed. It's in the other shed, the other garage. I'm going to stick the new front diff in there. Front diff is in there. Very hard to see from here. There's this transfer box. Oh, you can see the air hanging off the side of the diff. So the front end's all done. That's mostly sorted out. Obviously, very disassembled car. We don't run a concrete floor in our race car. Pieces missing. Wouldn't normally see the concrete floor, would we? Anyway, so that's that part of that done. Toyota fans might recognize some of this stuff on the bench here. It's not from one of my machines. It's from something that's had a bit of a something that needs sorted out. So I'm doing that, so you have to excuse that. However, on the other bench, here's our rear diff. I haven't painted this or powder coated or anything, because I quite like the fact that it's actually still in really good condition and factory markings on it and stuff. Really good. Might be a bit optimistic. Good condition with factory markings. Tidied up most other things on it. Even made this look bling bling. And I took some more material off our little mount that I've made here that goes into the subframe. So that one's ready to go with our special adapter for our speed sensor on that side, and even chop this one off on this side where we don't need it to reduce some weight. That's ready to go back in the car when I get a moment. It's probably going to go from there to some place to store it for a little while, because I don't want it in the car right now and busy doing other things. So there you go. That's, maybe we'll call that part one of the Mad March version. It must be like version 4 by now, I guess. We started off with the first one, which I broke quite significantly. Built another version, so that was March 2. Then we converted it to 4-wheel drive. That's March 3, I guess you would say, because there's quite a lot of changes at that point in time. And there'll be quite a few changes this time around. Still sort of the same car, but a big upgrade. Maybe it's the March version 3.5, I guess we'll call it that. Bunch of engine stuff all packed away in the interior of the car, stacked there. Some things not covered, some things are covered. That's not really where the engine block is supposed to be stored, is it? That's supposed to be in the back of the car with all the bits in it. But anyway, we've gone and seen our mates at Collins Profile Cutting. Got some vapor blasting done. So when we put this all back, and I've milled off some things that we didn't need. So when we put this back together, she's going to look a little bit nicer than what it has done in the past. Spent a little bit of effort on tidying things up and presentation and stuff. So that'll be good. Waiting for, I can't remember who makes them, sorry, I've forgotten off the top of my head. Block guards that fill in these things. They need to get to Z1 so that Z1 can send them to me. And we're waiting for some valve springs as well. So really all this engine stuff is kind of hurry up and wait, which is why I'm getting on with some other things. So that's that. As you saw earlier, hopefully I've edited that in there successfully. The Gloria left, owner came up from Wellington, flew up, picked him up at the airport. That didn't go as smoothly as it could have gone because it's the Gloria, and I think she was getting quite cozy, as I said earlier. She was enjoying her time in the workshop here and didn't really want it to end. So, through a couple of little tantrums, just real dumb stuff. Bit of a tidy up. Basically, we had a throttle issue because it's electronic throttle, right, drive-by-wire. So, when I put it all back together after fixing the intercooler and the clutch and all that sort of carry on, it was mint in the driveway here. Drove down the road and the throttle failed on it. Tried to reset it just by turning it off, back on again. That was all good. That worked briefly and then failed straight away. And so I came back here and I plugged it into the laptop. And there's a tracking code. And I cleared that error and had the laptop there to try and get it to volt again while I was driving around to see what was going on. 2 hours worth of driving later and it's mint. So there were no problems. I was like, okay, all right, it's just one of those weird things, whatever. And of course, that was on a Sunday. And then on the Monday, I drove off to the airport to pick up the customer and boom, throttle fails again. Halfway there, probably. And it did it twice. And I was like, okay, well, that's all right. It'll get us back home and we'll look into what's going on. We'll figure it out because it won't be anything major. And I was right. It was nothing major. It was just, it's major that the throttle stops working while you're driving the car, but the fault, I'll use the term loosely, that was causing that was not major. So anyway, the poor customer wanted to drive his car home. So as soon as he got in it, it just failed completely. It wouldn't drive. The throttle just would not work at all. So a little bit of, I won't go into details how I did that, a little bit of trickery, and the car drove perfect the rest of the way home. Got into the garage here and did a little bit of diagnostics, and probably a grain of sand inside the throttle plug on the drive-by-wire throttle. It was just all it takes, right? So it's getting dodgy signals. ECU goes, this is not good. I don't like dodgy signals from our drive-by-wire because that's unsafe. So it goes into limp mode. So literally just a little bit of CRC on the plug, put it back together. We did another maybe an hour of driving around with the customer. Perfect. So off he went. Car got home to Wellington. Absolutely fine. No problems the rest of the way there. So, oops, I just gave away where he lived. Oh, well, you guys will see him down there anyway, so there's no biggie. So that's good. He's happy. I'm happy. It's finally gone. I got my workshop back. Yes! No, that's all right. It's all good. I mean, this is a big, long project, right? It's a lot longer than it should have been, and that's the way it goes. But at the end of the day, we presented a car to him that was far better than what we would have had right back at the start with our initial goals for what was going to happen with the project. We upped that game something chronic. So there's a few more little bits and pieces to go on, interior and stuff like that down there, and then the car will be properly epic. So that's good. Sorry there's been a bit of a lack of videos. There's been a lot of things happening that we don't really want to show on video, and a lot of things you don't want to see. So I'm going to change that very shortly. There will be some cool things. We'll drop that bomb later on. Like, share, and subscribe. YouTube's only giving me about 400 or 500 views per video and then moving them along, and none of you guys see them, so hit the notification bell and then you'll see more of this ugly face talking. But more importantly, you'll see some cool things happening with our little march. Alright, cheers boy!